The first thing she felt was the burn in her leg, not the heat of the Texas sun, not the dust choking her lungs, but the sharp, angry sting that reminded her she was still something people could hurt. Mabel Hart stood barefoot in the yard, the ground cracked and pale beneath her feet like dead skin. The ranch fence groaned in the wind. Somewhere a horse stamped, restless. She had not slept. She had not eaten enough to matter. Her dress clung to her like it had learned her shape through suffering, stained with dust and old sweat and something darker she tried not to think about. Caleb Rourke sat a few steps away on a low stool, elbows on his knees, hat pulled low. He had not spoken since they arrived, and not a word. That silence pressed harder than any shout. Mabel's hands shook. She hated that most of all. She took a breath that scraped her throat raw, then reached down and grabbed the hem of her dress. The fabric caught for a second, as if it wanted to save her the shame. She yanked it up anyway. The bruise on her thigh was ugly and swollen, purple turning black where iron had rubbed her raw. And what happened next at that ranch was not what she had been taught to expect from any man. It was the kind of mark chains leave when people pretend it is just business. A thin line of dried blood marked where the skin had split. It was not fresh, but it burned like it was, a mark left by chains that were gone now, though the memory of them still bit into her bones. She held the fabric up just long enough to make him see the bruise. Her voice came out flat, stripped of everything but truth. You paid for me. Now do it. The words landed in the dirt between them and stayed there. If Caleb answered the way most men would, this story would end in the first minute. Caleb's head lifted slowly. His eyes went first to the wound, then away, like he had been struck. He did not look at her face. He did not look at her body. He looked at the ground, jaw tight, breathing measured, as if he were holding something back that might break him open if he let it loose. For one long second, Mabel thought she had misjudged him, that this would be the same as every other place, the same end. Then Caleb stood. He crossed the few steps between them, not fast, not slow. He set his hat down carefully, like it mattered. He knelt in the dust in front of her, eyes level with her knees, not her chest, not her face. He reached into his coat and pulled out a clean cloth and a small bottle. He held them up where she could see his hands. I'm going to clean that, he said quietly. If you let me. The shock of it stole her breath. He poured a little liquid onto the cloth. The smell of alcohol cut through the dust. When the cloth touched her skin, she flinched despite herself. The sting was sharp, honest, different from the pain she knew too well. Caleb worked slowly, careful, like the wound belonged to someone he owed something to. I paid to stop them, he said, not to touch you. Her grip on the dress loosened. The fabric fell back into place without her noticing. When he finished, he wrapped the cloth around her thigh and tied it gently. He stood, stepped back, and only then met her eyes. She saw it then. The faint pale line around his finger, the ghost of a ring that was no longer there. Her stomach dropped. She turned away before he could see what crossed her face. Hours earlier, she had stood on a wooden platform in Fort Worth, in a place people pretended was just another business. They called it debt. They called it contracts. Men leaned on posts and weighed her with their eyes like she was a mule with a limp. She don't talk, the auction man had said. Been sold twice already. $63 to start. Mabel had stared at the floorboards, counting cracks, because looking at faces made it worse. Faces wanted things. No one spoke at first. Then a voice from the back. Calm. Tired. 63. That was Caleb. When the gavel fell, she felt nothing. Not relief, not fear, just the dull certainty that the road went on. Now she stood in his yard, bandaged by the man who had bought her, staring at a ranch that felt too quiet to be safe. Caleb stepped toward the small table near the cabin door. He took a folded paper from his pocket, the one with the ink and the stamp, the one that said her name like it owned it. He lit a match. The paper caught fast. He held it until the flame burned his fingers, then dropped it into the dirt and crushed it with his boot. You're not owned here, he said, but the way he said it sounded like he was trying to convince himself to. The wind carried the ash away. Mabel looked past him toward the larger house set back from the yard. A curtain shifted just slightly, enough to tell her she was not alone. Her chest tightened. She had learned the rules of survival the hard way. Nothing given came without cost. Nothing kind stayed kind for long. Caleb picked up his hat and walked away, leaving her standing there with a clean bandage and more questions than she could hold. As the sun dipped lower, one thought hammered through her mind, louder than the pain in her leg. If the man who bought her would not claim her, and the house behind him already held a woman, then what exactly had she been brought here for that night? The ranch did not sleep. The wind moved through the fence like it was counting ribs. Somewhere beyond the corral, a horse snorted and stamped, annoyed by flies that never seemed to rest. Mabel lay on the narrow cot in the small cabin, staring at the ceiling boards, listening to the house breathe. Her leg throbbed under the clean bandage. It was a different kind of pain now. Not sharp, not angry. Just there. Honest. The kind that reminds you something happened and will not let you forget it. She kept waiting for the door to open. It never did. Morning came the way it always did in that part of Texas. Too bright, too early, like it did not care what kind of night you had. Heat settled over the land before the sun fully cleared the horizon. Dust already hung in the air. Caleb was up before she stepped outside. He always was. He moved with the quiet of a man who had learned not to announce himself. Coffee boiled on the stove. Tools were laid out neat. No wasted motion. No hurry. The kind of routine built over years of being alone with your thoughts. Mabel watched him from the doorway. He did not look back. He did not ask her to work. He did not tell her to stay put either. That was worse somehow. It left space for her mind to wander, and her mind had learned some dark road. She limped toward the pump and drew water. The metal handle squealed. She flinched at the sound, then felt foolish for it. She was free now, at least on paper. She told herself that. The words felt thin. The road that led to this place stretched back in her mind, long and ugly. Fort Worth was not far as the crow flies, but it might as well have been another world. Hell's Half-Acre had a way of sticking to a person. The smells, the looks, men pretending not to see while seeing everything. They called it business, they called it debt. Funny how chains did not care what name you gave them. Caleb had not spoken much on the ride out. He had cut her loose, handed her water, and kept his eyes on the horizon. When he told her not to run, it had sounded like a warning, not a promise. She had learned not to argue with warnings. The bruise on her leg came from that ride, iron rubbing skin raw with every mile, a small thing compared to what she had known, but it stayed with her like a signature. By mid-morning, the heat pressed down hard. Caleb took a break by the fence, wiping sweat from his neck with a worn cloth. He glanced toward the main house once, quick and careful, then back to his work. Mabel noticed. She noticed the way he avoided the windows, the way he never raised his voice, the way he stood between the road and the yard when dust rose in the distance. Even when it turned out to be nothing but wind. She also noticed things that did not belong to a man living alone. A second cup set out by habit, then put away. A bit of lace tucked into a drawer when he thought no one was looking. A curtain in the big house that moved when there was no breeze. That night, while the sky turned the color of old copper, she found the mark in the dirt where he had burned the paper, blackened ash mixed with soil. Nothing left to prove it had ever existed. For the first time in a long while, Mabel felt something shift. Not hope. She did not trust that word, but curiosity, sharp and unwelcome. Why buy someone you would not claim? Why burn the only proof you had paid? Why bring trouble down on a quiet ranch in Palo Pinto County when trouble was already hunting you? Before the road brings what's coming, answer me this. If you were Mabel, run tonight, or stay and test Caleb. Comment, run, or stay. The days settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal, and that was the most dangerous part. Normal made a person careless, and right when she started to breathe again, The road sent her a warning. On the third afternoon, the air changed. Mabel felt it before she saw it. The horses lifted their heads. Birds went quiet. A thin line of dust rose on the road, steady and sure. Caleb straightened slowly. His hand rested on the fence post, knuckles white. Mabel followed his gaze. Whatever was coming was not lost, and it was not passing through. It was headed straight for the ranch. The dust on the road did not lie. It rolled in steady and low, not the wild scatter of a lost rider or a drifting herd. This was a straight line, measured and patient, like someone who knew exactly where they were going. Caleb did not reach for his gun. Not yet. He stood there by the fence, one hand resting on the sun-cracked wood. Eyes narrowed toward the road. He had that look a man gets when the past finally stops circling and comes straight on. Mabel felt her stomach tighten. She told herself she was free. She told herself there was no paper left that said otherwise. But the body remembers things the mind tries to forget. Her shoulders stiffened. Her breath went shallow. She shifted her weight without realizing it, favoring the leg that still ached beneath the bandage. The horses noticed too, ears back, heads high. One of them snorted like it did not like the smell of what was coming. By the time the riders came into view, the sun was high and cruel. 3 men, 1 in front, 2 behind. They rode easy, like they owned the road, like they had never been told no in their lives. Caleb took 2 steps forward, putting himself between Mabel and the gate. It was not dramatic. It was instinct. The lead rider reined in just short of the fence. He wore a badge that caught the light and smiled like it had teeth. Sheriff Silas Red. He took his time getting down. Dust puffed around his boots, and he tipped his hat, not to be polite, but to show he could. "Well now," he said, voice smooth as warm oil. "Did not expect to see you all the way out here." "Caleb Rourke?" Caleb nodded once. "Road runs both ways." The sheriff chuckled like that was funny. His eyes slid past Caleb and landed on Mabel. They stopped there. Mabel realized he was not looking at a stranger. He was looking at a problem he thought he already owned. Something cold crawled up her spine. She had seen that look before. Not interest. Recognition. Sheriff Red squinted slightly, like he was lining up a shot. His gaze dropped to her hands, then her wrists, then her leg. It lingered just long enough to find what it wanted. "That's a long way from Fort Worth," he said. "Ain't it, miss?" Mabel did not answer. Silence had kept her alive before. She leaned on it now. Caleb's voice cut in, low and steady. "You got business here, Sheriff?" Red laughed softly and walked closer to the fence. He rested his elbow on the top rail like he planned to stay a while. "Just checking on some loose ends," he said. "Funny thing about debts, they got a way of following folks." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single bullet. He set it on the fence post between them and tapped it once with his finger. "Just a reminder," he said. "Some things don't stay buried." The air felt heavier after that. Mabel stared at the bullet. She knew that kind of message. She'd learned the language early. It meant someone thought they still owned a piece of you. Red straightened and looked back at Caleb. "I hear you've been buying trouble lately." Caleb did not flinch. "I hear a lot of things." The sheriff smiled wider. "That girl there? Hart, ain't it?" The name hit Mabel like a slap. Her breath caught. Just for a second. But it was enough. Red saw it. His smile thinned. "Well, I will be," he said softly. "Thought that whole family burned up years ago." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You've had your look." Red raised his hands in mock surrender. "No harm meant. Just doing my job." He swung back into the saddle with a practiced ease before he turned his horse. He looked at Mabel one last time. "Be seeing you," he said. Then they rode off, leaving the dust to settle slow and mean. For a long moment, no one moved. When the sound of hooves finally faded, Caleb let out a breath he had been holding too long. He picked up the bullet and turned it over in his palm, then slipped it into his pocket like it was something he might need later. Mabel felt her knees go weak. She sat down hard on the step without meaning to. Her hands shook again, and she hated it. That night, The ranch felt smaller. In the dark, she heard a woman's voice in the big house whisper, "Third stall," like a word that kept escaping on its own. The wind came up after dark, rattling the loose boards and carrying the smell of rain that never quite arrived. Caleb lit a lantern in the main house and left the cabin door open, a quiet invitation. Mabel did not go in right away. When she finally did, she noticed the way the light was set, not bright, not dim, like someone had thought about another person's eyes. She noticed a woman's brush on the shelf, half hidden. A folded shawl laid careful over the back of a chair. Caleb sat at the table with his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he'd forgotten to drink. Mabel reached into her pocket and pulled out the small metal object she'd carried through every place she'd been sold, her father's old pocket watch. The hinge was loose, the glass was scratched. It still ticked. She set it on the table between them, and for a second she felt there was something else her father left behind, something heavier than a watch, but the memory would not come. "You knew him," she said. It was not really a question. Caleb stared at the watch like it might start talking on its own. The room was quiet enough to hear the clock on the wall marking time. "I did," he said finally. She waited. He did not rush. That told her more than words. "They came at night," he said. "Said they had papers. Said your father was holding land he had no right to. I rode to warn him. By the time I got there, the fire was already up." Mabel closed her eyes. She did not see flames. She smelled them. "I was too late," Caleb said, "and I have been paying for it ever since." She looked at him then, really looked, not as a buyer, not as a savior, as a man who had been standing in the wrong place when history swung its fist. The watch ticked on between them. Outside, something moved near the fence, a soft sound, not a rider, something closer. Caleb's eyes flicked toward the barn for half a second, like it held a secret he had promised himself not to touch. There were things a man can live with, and things he cannot open without changing everything. Caleb's eyes lifted toward the door. "Someone else is part of this," he said quietly. "Someone you think is gone." Mabel felt her heart start to pound. In the next room, a floorboard creaked, and in that instant, Mabel knew the worst secret in this house was not Caleb. And in that small sound, everything she thought she understood about this place began to come apart. The sound from the next room was small, barely there. The kind you might miss if you were not already listening for trouble. A soft step, wood settling under weight, a breath that did not belong to the wind. Mabel froze. Caleb did not move either. He sat very still at the table, eyes on the doorway that led deeper into the house. The lantern light wavered, throwing shadows that stretched and pulled like they were trying to escape the walls. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the sound came again, a careful shift. Someone trying not to be heard. Mabel's heart hammered so hard she felt it in her throat. Every place she had been before had taught her the same lesson. When you hear someone behind a door and no one warned you they were there, it never ends well. Caleb stood up slowly. He did not reach for his gun. He did not raise his voice. He took one step toward the hallway and stopped. "It's all right," he said. Not loud, not soft, just steady. The words were not meant for Mabel. A figure appeared at the edge of the doorway. At first, all Mabel could see was the outline, a woman's shape in the low light. She stood half hidden, one hand braced against the wall, like the house itself was helping hold her up. The lantern light caught her face next. Mabel sucked in a sharp breath. The woman was thin. Older than Mabel by years, that showed in the lines around her eyes. Her hair was pulled back tight, streaked with gray. One side of her neck bore a faint shine, skin that had healed wrong a long time ago. She looked tired. She looked alive. Caleb stepped aside just enough to give her space. He did not touch her. That small thing told Mabel more than 1,000 explanations. The woman's eyes moved from Caleb to Mabel and stopped. Something passed across her face. Surprise, fear, and something else that made Mabel's chest ache before she understood why. "You should not be up," the woman said to Caleb. "Not with strangers watching the road," Her voice was low, careful, like someone used to measuring every word. Caleb nodded once. She needed to know. The woman's gaze did not leave Mabel. She took one step forward, then another, as if testing ground that might give way. Mabel's mind raced. A wife. That had been her first thought. A wife hidden away while another woman was brought to the yard and bandaged like a problem to be managed. Anger flared, hot and sudden. The woman stopped a few feet away, close enough for the light to show her clearly now. "Your name is Mabel," she said. Mabel's breath caught. "Who told you that?" The woman swallowed. Her hands trembled. "Just a little." "No one told me," she said. "I have been saying it to myself for years." The room felt smaller. Caleb looked between them, jaw tight. He did not interrupt. Mabel searched the woman's face, hunting for lies, for anything familiar. There was nothing she could grab onto, just the faint shine of that scar on her neck, and the way her eyes kept flicking to the watch, still sitting on the table. "You should sit," the woman said, nodding toward a chair. "Your leg." Mabel ignored the suggestion. "Who are you?" she asked. The woman's lips pressed together. For a moment, it looked like she might turn back into the shadows and disappear. Then she straightened. "My name is Evelyn," she said. Evelyn Hart. The name hit like a blow. Mabel shook her head before she could stop herself. "No, she died. They said she died in the fire." Evelyn flinched. The sound was small but sharp. "They said a lot of things." She said, most of them were lies." Mabel felt dizzy. The walls seemed to tilt. She reached for the table without realizing it. Evelyn took another step closer. "You do not recognize me," she said softly. "I know. It has been a long time." She lifted her hair slightly, just enough to show the edge of the scar on her neck, pale against darker skin. The roof beam fell. She said, "Pinned me, burned me. I did not scream. I could not." Mabel stared. Her mind reached back through years of smoke and shouting and found a memory she had buried deep. Her sister's voice, singing low to keep her calm when thunder rolled. Evelyn hummed a few notes, and the tune was simple, old. A lullaby their mother used to sing when nights felt too long. Mabel's knees buckled. She sank into the chair hard, breath coming in short pulls. Evelyn knelt in front of her, careful, like she might spook a wounded animal. "I lived," she said, "barely. I ran when I could. I hid. I changed my name. I did not come looking for you because I was told you were gone too." Tears blurred Mabel's vision. She hated that they came now, when she had learned to do without them. Caleb cleared his throat quietly. "We married," he said, "so she could stay, so the land could not be taken without a fight." Mabel looked up at him. The words landed heavy. "You married my sister." Evelyn nodded. "It was not love at first," she said. "It was survival." Caleb did not deny it. The truth sat there between them, rough and unpolished. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the fence. Somewhere down the road, a horse whinnied, distant but close enough to matter. Evelyn's eyes flicked toward the window. "He will be back," she said. "The sheriff." Caleb nodded. "Soon." Mabel wiped her face with the back of her hand. Her head spun with the weight of it all. A sister she thought dead, a husband she never expected, a sheriff who knew her name. She looked at Evelyn. "Why now? After all this time?" Evelyn's voice dropped. "Because he finally figured out what I am worth." A sound came from outside. Hooves on hard ground, closer than before. Caleb moved toward the door. And in that moment, Mabel understood something she had not before. This place had not been a refuge. It had been a waiting ground. The question was not whether the past would knock again. It was what price it would demand when it came through the door. The sound of hooves did not rush the house. It slowed. That's what made it worse. Made it. Because a man who moves slow usually already made up his mind. Mabel stood near the table, one hand braced against the wood, feeling the old watch cold beneath her fingers. Outside, the rider circled once, slow and deliberate. like a man checking the weight of a door before kicking it in. Evelyn did not move away from her. She stood close. Close enough that Mabel could feel the warmth of another body, something she had not trusted in a long time. Caleb stepped past them toward the front of the house, his shoulders set like he had already decided where he would stand when the storm hit. The knock came then. Not hard, not polite either. Caleb opened the door before it came again. Sheriff Silas Red stood there with the same easy smile, hat tipped just enough to show the badge. Two men waited behind him, hands resting near their belts, eyes roaming the yard like they were picking out what they would take first. Evening, Red said. Smells like supper. No one answered him. His eyes moved past Caleb and landed on Evelyn. The smile changed. Not much, just enough. Well, I will be, he said. Took you long enough to show your face. Evelyn's jaw tightened. You already know why I hid. Red started to step inside without waiting to be invited. Caleb did not move aside. Red's eyes still slid past him, taking in the table, the watch, and Mabel standing stiff as a fence post. There she is, he said. The other one? Mabel felt her chest tighten. The word other sat wrong. Red leaned against the doorframe like he planned to stay a while. You know why I'm here, he said. County records have a funny way of turning up old names. Hart, Rourke, land that never quite changed hands proper. Caleb pulled the door mostly shut behind him, leaving it just open enough to prove he was not afraid. The sound echoed through the room. Caleb stayed in front of the door instead of stepping aside. His hand rested near the grip of his gun, not showing it off, just making a point. You step 1 foot inside my house without a proper warrant, and this ends different. Silas, he said. Red's smile twitched. He lifted the folded paper a little higher. Got one right here. Old friend, that land was stolen, Evelyn said. You know it. Red chuckled. Everything was stolen back then. Depends who writes it down. He tapped the paper against his palm. I got myself a warrant. Says I can take in anyone connected to the old Hart property while we sort things out. Mabel's stomach dropped. Caleb did not move. You will not touch her. Red looked at him, amused. You married one. Bought the other? You got a habit. Caleb. The words hung heavy. Evelyn stepped forward. She is free. You saw the contract burn? Red shrugged. Paper burns? People don't. He turned his gaze back to Mabel. You come with me. Quiet like. I promise to be gentle about it. Mabel felt the room tilt for a heartbeat. She was back on the platform in Fort Worth, staring at the floor, waiting for someone else to decide what happened next. Then she heard the ticking.